Hey guys, tonight we're climbing inside one of the most miserable stretches of time a human body can produce entirely on its own. No weapon, no accident, no enemy at the gates. Just a nervous system that got extremely comfortable with a long-term house guest and is now throwing an operatic tantrum because that house guest left without saying goodbye. We're talking about the first 72 hours of heroin withdrawal, hour by hour, from the inside. Not the movie version, where somebody sweats artfully for 90 seconds and then emerges cured and emotionally available. The real thing, the yawning, the sneezing, the legs. Oh, we will absolutely be discussing the legs. Before we get going, a real thank you to the listener who suggested this one. You sent it in with a note that most people talk about the drug, and almost nobody talks about the leaving, and you were right. So here we are. If you get something out of tonight, a like and a subscribe genuinely helps, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It is always 2 a.m. somewhere. Oh, and we are on Spotify now, so if you would rather drift off without a screen glowing at you, the link is in the description. Now, dim the lights, put a fan on for that soft white noise, get comfortable, pull the blanket up because tonight is one of those nights where being warm is going to feel like a genuine privilege. Let us sit with a few questions first. Why does withdrawal start with yawning of all things, as if your body's opening statement is boredom? Where does the phrase cold turkey actually come from? And why is it weirdly accurate? Why do your legs kick on their own, like a dog dreaming about running, for hours? Why does your nose run like you just walked into a room full of freshly cut onions? Can it actually kill you? Or is that just something people say? Why does the flu feel like a mild inconvenience by comparison, when technically the symptoms are cousins? And why, in the middle of all of it, does time itself seem to slow down until an hour takes roughly a week to pass? We will get to all of it. Congratulations. You have just woken up on hour 6. You have not used since yesterday evening. Nothing hurts yet. Nothing is obviously wrong. But somewhere underneath your ribs, in a place you cannot point to, something has quietly begun to go sideways, and your body already knows a great deal more about tonight than you do. Good luck. Let us begin with something people get wrong almost immediately. Nobody wakes up, stretches, looks out the window at a beautiful morning, and decides that today feels like an excellent day to go into withdrawal. That is not how this starts. Withdrawal usually begins because of logistics. The money ran out. The connection stopped answering. You got arrested or admitted, or your car broke down in the wrong county on the wrong afternoon. The decision to stop when it finally arrives is very often made for you by circumstances that could not care less about your readiness. And so the clock starts, not with resolve, not with a montage, but with a missed dose and a slowly dawning arithmetic problem in the back of your mind. Let us look at the shapes this actually takes, because they are almost always disappointingly ordinary. The most common one is money. There was enough on Tuesday, and there is not enough on Thursday, and no amount of rearranging figures on the back of an envelope is going to change that. The second most common is supply. Your person is not answering. Their phone is off, or they have been picked up, or they have simply moved on, or the whole city has gone dry at once for reasons nobody can adequately explain, and you're standing in a car park at 11 at night refreshing a screen that is never going to show you anything useful. There is no drama in either of these. There is just a slow, sinking recalculation. Then there are the involuntary versions. A cell, a hospital bed after something unrelated, a broken wrist or an infection or a car accident, where the doctors are focused entirely on the obvious problem and have not yet worked out that a second one is coming. A locked ward. A relative who has finally had enough and has changed the locks while you were out. In every one of these, the withdrawal is not the event. The withdrawal is the thing that happens underneath the event, quietly, on its own schedule, while everybody in the room is looking somewhere else. And here is the part that carries genuine weight. Because withdrawal so rarely happens by appointment, it almost never happens under good conditions. Nobody has stocked the flat with water and electrolyte sachets. Nobody has taken 3 days off work. There is no doctor on call, no medication ready, no friend sitting in the next room with a bucket and a phone charger. You go into the worst 72 hours available to a human nervous system with whatever happens to be in the cupboard, which is usually half a packet of paracetamol and a very optimistic attitude. Compare that to how we treat literally any other 3-day medical ordeal. If you were having a wisdom tooth out, there would be a date in the diary, a lift arranged, a bag of frozen peas ready, and somebody sending you a message asking how it went. If you were having your appendix removed, there would be forms. Here, there is a man sitting on the edge of a bed at 2 a.m, realizing, with a strange administrative calm, that tomorrow is going to be extraordinarily bad, and there is absolutely nothing in the fridge. There is also the tomorrow problem, which deserves its own mention. Almost everybody in this position has a plan to stop properly at some future point. Next month, after the wedding, once things settle down. The plan is sincere, it is detailed, and it is permanently located about 3 weeks in the future, which is close enough to feel real and far enough away to never arrive. So when withdrawal finally comes, it comes as an interruption to the plan rather than the fulfillment of it, and it finds you completely unprepared, because the version of you that was going to be prepared was scheduled for later. The result is that the vast majority of people who go through this do it badly, alone, and by accident. Not because they chose the hard way, because nobody offered them an easier one and the calendar was not consulted. So no, nobody schedules this weekend. The weekend schedules you, usually on a Wednesday, with about 4 hours notice and no refunds. To understand why the next 3 days go the way they go, you have to understand what your nervous system has been up to behind your back. Your brain makes its own opioids, small, sensible amounts, released when you laugh or exercise or hold someone. It is a modest little in-house operation, like a bakery that produces exactly enough bread for the family. Then heroin arrives, and it does not bring bread. It brings an entire freight train of bread every single day on schedule. And your brain, which is nothing if not efficient, looks at that freight train and makes a very reasonable business decision. It closes the bakery. The technical name for this is downregulation, and it happens in 2 directions at once. First, your brain stops producing much of its own endorphin supply, because why would it, when the trains keep coming? Second, the receptors that catch those chemicals begin to change. Some become less sensitive. Some are pulled off the cell surface entirely and tucked away inside, like a shopkeeper closing half the tills because there is only ever one customer, and he arrives with the lorry. The system rebalances itself around the assumption that the lorry is permanent. At the same time, something else is happening slightly deeper in a small cluster of cells at the base of your brainstem called the locus coeruleus. This is a genuinely important little structure, roughly the size of a grain of rice, and it is your body's alarm system. It produces noradrenaline, the chemical that makes you alert, tense, sweaty, and ready to run away from something. Opioids sit on it like a hand pressing down on a spring, keeping it quiet. Keep that hand there for months and the spring adapts by pushing back harder, cranking up its own output to compensate, until you have an alarm system straining upward and a chemical hand pressing downward, and the two of them cancelling out into something that resembles normal. That is the important word, normal. Because at a certain point, and this catches almost everybody by surprise, you're no longer using to feel good. You're using to feel like a person. The euphoria that started all of this faded months or years ago and was quietly replaced by maintenance, and the dose that used to lift you above the line now only just gets you back to it. This is the strangest and most misunderstood part of dependence. From the outside, it looks like relentless pleasure-seeking. From the inside, it is a full-time job keeping a badly balanced system from tipping over. So think about what happens the moment the hand lifts off the spring. Everything that has been quietly straining in the opposite direction is suddenly straining against nothing at all. The locus coeruleus, which has spent months building up pressure, fires without opposition and floods your system with noradrenaline. That single mechanism accounts for a remarkable amount of what is coming. The sweating, the racing heart, the goosebumps, the anxiety, the insomnia. Almost everything you're about to experience over the next 3 days is, at root, one small structure in your brainstem overcorrecting spectacularly after a very long time being held down. And the bakery is still shut. Your own endorphin production, switched off through disuse, does not simply come roaring back the moment the freight trains stop. It has to be rebuilt, and rebuilding takes weeks, sometimes months, which means that for the entire duration of what is coming, you have no chemical buffer of any kind, no natural pain-killing, no natural comfort, nothing between you and every signal your body decides to send. It is worth sitting with how coldly logical all of this is. Your body did not betray you. It adapted intelligently and efficiently to the environment it was given, exactly as it is designed to do. It is behaving impeccably. It is simply behaving impeccably in response to conditions that no longer exist, which is a very polite way of saying that for the next 72 hours, you are going to be punished for your nervous system's excellent work ethic. Here is the part that feels deeply unfair. Withdrawal does not care when you decided to quit. It cares when the last dose wore off, and those are almost never the same moment. Heroin has a short half-life, which is a clinical way of saying it leaves in a hurry. 6 to 12 hours after your last dose, the receptors that have been comfortably occupied for months or years begin to notice a vacancy, and they begin with escalating urgency to complain about it. There is no negotiating with this timeline. It is chemistry, not character. Your willpower has approximately the same influence over it as your opinion has over the tide. Let us put some actual figures on this, because the numbers explain a great deal about why this particular drug produces this particular experience. Heroin itself is metabolized almost immediately into morphine, and the half-life of morphine in the body is somewhere around 2 to 3 hours. That means that every couple of hours, roughly half of what remains disappears. By hour 6 there is very little left. By hour 12 there is essentially nothing. The drug is gone long before the consequences of it having been there have even started. Compare that with methadone, which has a half-life that can stretch to 24 or even 36 hours, and you begin to see why the two experiences are so different. Methadone withdrawal is slower to start, milder at any given moment, and considerably longer, sometimes running for weeks. Heroin withdrawal is the opposite. It arrives fast, hits hard, and is largely finished inside a week. Neither is preferable exactly. One is a punch, and the other is a long walk in bad shoes. What all of this means practically is that the timeline you are about to live through is not yours to set. It was set the moment the last dose wore off, and it will run at its own pace regardless of what you want, what you have planned, or how ready you feel. This is genuinely one of the hardest things for people around you to understand. Somebody who has never experienced physical dependence tends to imagine withdrawal as an extremely intense version of wanting something, like giving up sugar or cigarettes, but more so. It is not that. Wanting is involved, certainly, but the wanting is riding on top of a physical event that is happening to you whether you cooperate or not. Think of it this way. If you decided tomorrow to stop producing stomach acid through sheer determination, you would fail, and nobody would suggest it was a moral failing. The processes we're discussing sit in the same category. They belong to the part of your nervous system that also handles your heart rate and your pupil size and your body temperature, none of which have ever once asked your permission for anything. There is one further wrinkle, and it is a nasty one. The clock can be started for you, instantly and without warning, by a medication. Naloxone, the overdose reversal drug, works by stripping opioids off the receptors in seconds. It saves an enormous number of lives, and it should absolutely be used every single time somebody stops breathing. No hesitation, no debate. But for a dependent person, it also compresses the onset of withdrawal from 6 hours into about 90 seconds. This is called precipitated withdrawal, and it is why people sometimes wake up from an overdose reversal angry and desperately unwell rather than grateful. They have just been dropped, without transition, into hour 30. The same thing can happen with buprenorphine if it is taken too early, which is why the timing of that first dose matters so much, and why anybody starting it needs proper guidance rather than a well-meaning friend with a bit of experience. So the clock is running. It started without asking, and the first thing it is going to do at around hour 4 is something so subtle that you will almost certainly try to explain it away. It starts with almost nothing. That is the strange part. Hour 4 is not painful, not really. It is a vague, low-grade wrongness, like walking into your own kitchen and sensing that somebody moved something, but being unable to work out what. You feel slightly cold and then slightly not. You are restless in a way that is not quite boredom. You keep checking the time. You put on a jumper and take it off 8 minutes later. Nothing hurts. Nothing is visibly happening. And yet some ancient part of your brain has already started scanning the horizon, like a dog that heard thunder 10 miles out. The clinical term for what is beginning here is subacute, which is a wonderfully bloodless word for a genuinely peculiar experience. Nothing on any scale would register. If a doctor examined you right now, they would find a person in essentially normal health, perhaps a fraction warm, perhaps a fraction quick in the pulse, nothing worth writing down, and yet you know, not intellectually, somewhere lower than that. The unease is not really an emotion at hour 4. It is closer to a physical sensation that has not yet found a location. It sits behind your sternum and slightly to the left, a kind of hollow static, and every attempt to identify it fails because it is not attached to anything. You have not received bad news. Nothing has gone wrong. You keep mentally running through your obligations, looking for the thing you've forgotten, and there is nothing there, and the feeling persists anyway. Then come the small behavioural tells, which are always more obvious to other people than to you. You get up and check the fridge without wanting anything. You close it. 90 seconds later, you open it again. You start a task and abandon it halfway through, then start a different one and abandon that too. You put music on and turn it off. If somebody were watching you from across a room, they would say you were fidgety, unsettled, waiting for a phone call. What they are actually watching is the very first stirrings of the locus coeruleus, that grain of rice at the base of your skull, beginning to lift its head. Temperature is the first thing to go genuinely strange. Not dramatically, not yet. Just a sense that the room cannot decide what it wants to be. You're cold enough to reach for a jumper, and then, within a few minutes, warm enough to resent it. This is the first crack appearing in your thermoregulation, and it is going to widen considerably over the next 12 hours until it is one of the defining miseries of the whole affair. At hour 4, it is merely an annoyance, the kind of thing you would blame on a draft. And this brings us to the single most human part of this stage, which is the explaining. Because at hour 4, you will absolutely explain it away. You are coming down with something. You slept badly. You did not eat enough today. The heating in this place has never worked properly. Every one of these explanations is plausible. Every one of them is available, and every one of them is preferable to the actual answer, which you already know and are choosing for the moment not to look directly at. There is strange mercy in hour 4, though, and it is worth naming. This is the last stretch of time in the next 3 days where you are recognizably yourself. You can still hold a conversation. You can still make a decision. You can still, crucially, act. This is the window in which somebody could pick up a phone or get to a clinic or tell a friend what is about to happen, and the outcome of the entire 72 hours might be substantially different. Almost nobody uses it. Not through stupidity, because at hour 4 it does not feel like an emergency. It feels like a slightly odd afternoon, which is exactly what it is, right up until your jaw starts doing something you did not authorize. Of all the ways a body could announce a crisis, it picks yawning. Not screaming, not a fever. Yawning, the universal symbol for a mildly dull dinner party. And it starts small, 1 or 2, easily ignored. Then it is 5 in a row. Then it is 30 in an hour. Deep, jaw-cracking yawns that make your eyes water and give you absolutely no relief whatsoever because you're not tired. This is one of the earliest and most reliable signs of opioid withdrawal, and it is so consistent that clinicians actually score it. Somewhere out there is a medical form with a box on it for how much you've yawned, and tonight you would fill in every box. That form, by the way, is real, and it is worth knowing about. It is called the Clinical Opiate Withdrawal Scale, and it is used in emergency departments and clinics all over the world to work out how far along somebody is. It has 11 items on it: pulse rate, sweating, restlessness, pupil size, bone and joint aches, runny nose and watering eyes, gastrointestinal upset, tremor, anxiety, gooseflesh, and yawning, sitting there among the others as a formal medical observation, worth up to 4 points depending on whether you're doing it once or twice, 3 or more times, or, and this is the actual wording, several times a minute. Several times a minute, for hours. That's where you are heading. Nobody's entirely certain why yawning is so tightly bound up in this. The leading explanation ties it back to noradrenaline and to another chemical called dopamine, both of which surge as the opioids clear, and both of which appear to be involved in the yawning reflex in ways that are still not fully mapped. There is a strange supporting detail here, which is that certain medications used for Parkinson's disease, which act on dopamine, also produce excessive yawning as a side effect. The mechanism is old, deep in the brainstem, and it clearly serves some purpose that evolution has never bothered to explain to us. What matters more is what it feels like, because a yawn in this context is nothing like a yawn at the end of a long day. A normal yawn is satisfying. There is a build, a stretch, a release, and then a moment of pleasant fogginess. These yawns have the build and the stretch and then simply stop, delivering nothing at the end. It is the sensation of reaching for a light switch in the dark and finding flat wall. And because the release never arrives, the reflex immediately tries again and again. Your jaw begins to genuinely ache. The muscles at the hinge, just in front of your ears, become sore in a way that will still be noticeable tomorrow. Your eyes stream with every one, which means that within an hour or two you are a person who appears to be weeping continuously, while insisting that everything is fine. If you are in company, this is roughly when company starts to notice. There is something almost insulting about the symptom, and it is worth acknowledging the absurdity of it. Your body is in genuine physiological distress. Its chosen method of communicating this is the exact gesture a bored teenager makes during a history lesson. Somewhere in the design process, a decision was made that the opening statement of one of the most severe withdrawal syndromes in medicine would be a facial expression that means, broadly, this is not very interesting. And yet the yawning is useful in one specific way. It is early, it is unmistakable, and it is objective. It is very difficult to convince yourself that you're simply run down when you've yawned 40 times in 20 minutes, with your jaw aching and your eyes running. It is the moment the explaining stops working, because 2 hours from now, your face is going to escalate considerably, and there will be no explaining that away either. Next, your face joins in. Your nose starts running. Not a polite sniffle, but a genuine, unrelenting stream that no amount of tissue can keep ahead of. Your eyes water constantly, so you look like you're crying, which people will assume you are, and honestly by hour 20 you might be. Then come the sneezes. Not 1 or 2, 8 in a row, 12 in a row, until your ribs ache and you start apologizing to an empty room. All of this is your autonomic nervous system, the part that handles the admin of being alive, waking up from a long chemical nap and overcorrecting wildly, like a driver who dozed off and jerked the wheel. To be precise about it, what has just switched back on is the parasympathetic side of that system, the branch responsible for the unglamorous background maintenance of the body. Digestion, saliva, tears, mucus. Opioids suppress all of it comprehensively, which is why people who use them regularly tend to have dry mouths, dry eyes, and an almost supernatural resistance to the common cold's outward symptoms. Take the suppression away, and every one of those glands comes back online at once, at full pressure, with several months of enthusiasm to work through. The runny nose is the loudest of them, and it is genuinely relentless. This is not congestion. Congestion would at least be familiar. This is clear, thin fluid running freely and continuously, the way water runs from a tap that has been left slightly open, and it does not respond to blowing your nose because there is nothing to clear. There is only production. You will go through an entire box of tissues in a few hours and achieve nothing, and eventually you will give up and simply keep something pressed to your face permanently, which is the point at which you stop being able to leave the house. The eyes are worse in a quieter way, tears streaming down both cheeks continuously, with no emotional content whatsoever. You're not sad. You're not at hour 8, even particularly distressed. But your face has arranged itself into the universal signal of somebody in serious trouble, and it will hold that arrangement for the next 2 days regardless of what you're actually feeling. There is a specific social awkwardness to this that catches people off guard. Somebody asks if you're all right, and you say yes, and tears are running down your face while you say it, and neither of you knows how to proceed. Then the sneezing, which is the one nobody warns you about. Fits of it. 6, 8, 12 in unbroken succession, hard enough that you have to steady yourself against something. Your nasal passages are inflamed and hypersensitive and firing off the reflex at nothing at all, and each fit leaves your chest sore and your head ringing. If you have any bruised ribs, any recent chest injury, any hernia, you will discover it now, thoroughly. Add these together, and you arrive at what is probably the single most common misdiagnosis in this entire situation. You look exactly like somebody with a bad case of flu, streaming eyes, running nose, sneezing fits, a slight temperature, aching everywhere. Anybody who does not know your history will reach the obvious conclusion, and depending on your circumstances, you may well encourage them to. Countless people have spent the worst 3 days of their lives on somebody's sofa being brought soup and told to rest up, with everyone in the building sincerely believing they had picked something up at work. The resemblance is not coincidental, incidentally. Flu symptoms are largely produced by your immune system's inflammatory response rather than the virus itself, and there is real overlap in the signaling chemicals involved. Your body is running a genuinely similar program. It has simply been triggered by an absence rather than an invader. So you sit there, streaming from every available opening, apologizing for a cold you do not have, and then you glance down at your forearms and notice that your skin has done something extremely specific and extremely old. Now your skin gets involved, and it gets involved in a way that gave the English language one of its most enduring phrases. Wave after wave of goosebumps roll across your arms, your thighs, the back of your neck. Tiny muscles at the base of every hair follicle contracting all at once. Your skin becomes pale, pimpled, and cold to the touch. And if you have ever seen a plucked bird sitting in a refrigerator, you already know exactly what it looks like. That is where cold turkey comes from. Not a metaphor, not a folk saying with murky origins. Somebody looked at somebody else's arms and made a comparison, and the comparison was unkind and completely accurate. The muscle responsible has a name that sounds far grander than its job description. It is called the erector pili, and there is one attached to every hair on your body, a microscopic strip of smooth muscle that contracts to pull the hair upright. In a furred animal, this is genuinely useful. Fluff the coat up, trap a layer of warm air, survive the night. In a human being who has spent several 100,000 years steadily losing the coat, it accomplishes essentially nothing except making your forearms look like a pub snack. These muscles are controlled entirely by noradrenaline, which is why they are such a precise indicator of what is happening in your brainstem. You cannot raise your own goosebumps by choosing to. They are wired directly into the same alarm system that is currently misfiring at full volume, which is why the waves come and go in surges rather than staying constant. Every fresh pulse of noradrenaline sends another one rolling up your arms and across your scalp, and by hour 10 these are arriving every few minutes. The phrase itself has a reasonably well-documented history. It appears in North American newspapers in the early part of the 20th century, and by the 1920s it was in common use in the specific sense of stopping a drug abruptly. There is a competing theory that it comes from the idea of a plain, unadorned cold turkey sandwich, meaning something delivered without preparation or garnish, and that explanation is not impossible. but the skin explanation has the advantage of being visible on any dependent person's arms at hour 10 of any given night, and once you have seen it, the etymology stops feeling like a debate. What the phrase does not capture is how the skin actually feels, which is considerably stranger than it looks. Cold, obviously, and clammy, but also somehow tight, as though it has been fitted a size too small. Your scalp prickles constantly. The hair on your arm stands up and lies down and stands up again, and you become aware of individual hairs in a way you've never been before, which is the beginning of a sensory problem that gets substantially worse over the next day. And there is the sound of it. Not the goosebumps themselves, but the shivering that comes with them, which arrives around the same time. Fine, fast tremors through the shoulders and jaw, teeth actually clicking together, hands unsteady enough that holding a full cup becomes a genuine calculation. You're not cold, or rather, you're cold in a way that has nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Someone could hand you a hot water bottle and turn the heating to its maximum, and you would still be shaking, because the signal is not coming from your skin. It is coming from a grain of rice at the base of your skull that has entirely lost the plot. So there you are at hour 10, streaming, sneezing, yawning, shivering, covered in goose flesh, and looking so much like a supermarket poultry item that an entire idiom was built around the resemblance. And the honest truth is that this is still the easy part, because you have not yet discovered that you are about to lose the ability to sit still. Segment 8, Hour 12. You cannot get comfortable, and you will try everything. Let us talk about the chair, and the bed, and the floor, and the other side of the bed, and the sofa, and back to the chair again. Somewhere around hour 12 a symptom arrives that sounds trivial written down, and is quietly one of the worst parts of the entire experience. You cannot get comfortable, not in any position, not for any length of time. You lie down and within 90 seconds your body files a formal complaint. You stand up and it files another one. You will rearrange yourself several hundred times tonight, chasing a position that does not exist, and the exhaustion of that alone is difficult to describe to anybody who has not done it. The clinical word is akathisia, from the Greek, meaning roughly an inability to sit. It is a recognized condition in its own right, most often seen as a side effect of certain psychiatric medications, and it has a reputation among clinicians as one of the genuinely intolerable experiences medicine can produce. Patients who have had both have described it as worse than pain, because pain at least stays in one place and can be endured. This cannot be endured, because enduring requires stillness, and stillness is the exact thing that has been removed. Here is what makes it so difficult to convey. It is not that lying down is uncomfortable in the way a bad mattress is uncomfortable. It is that lying down becomes actively wrong after a short interval, in a way that builds pressure until moving is not a choice. Imagine the feeling of needing to sneeze, held indefinitely, distributed through your entire body. You can resist it briefly. The resistance costs you something, and when you eventually give in and shift position, you get about 90 seconds of relief before the pressure begins to rebuild. So you begin the tour, the bed is wrong. The other side of the bed is wrong in a slightly different way, which buys you 2 minutes. The floor is better for a while because it is cold and firm, and then the floor is unbearable. The bath, empty, sitting in it fully clothed, is a surprisingly popular destination, and one that a great many people arrive at independently without ever having heard of anybody else doing it. Standing up and leaning against a wall works briefly. Walking works, actually. Walking is the best thing available, which is why pacing becomes such a defining feature of the next day and a half. And this is where it becomes genuinely destructive. because you're already exhausted. You've not slept properly, you've been sweating and shivering for hours, you've eaten nothing, and now you are required to be in motion more or less continuously in order to make the sensation tolerable. It is a machine designed to burn through whatever reserves you have left. People walk for miles inside a single room over the course of a night. There are dependent people who have worn visible paths in carpet. There is a social dimension to it too, and it is not a small one. Akathisia looks like agitation. To anybody watching, you appear to be pacing, restless, unable to settle, unable to hold a conversation without standing up mid-sentence. In a hospital waiting room or a police cell or a family living room, this reads as somebody becoming difficult, and it is regularly mistaken for aggression or drug-seeking behaviour when it is neither. It is a person whose nervous system will not permit them to remain in a chair. The particular cruelty is the futility. Every other symptom you have had so far, unpleasant as it is, at least makes a kind of sense. Yawning is a reflex. Sneezing clears something. Shivering generates heat. This does nothing. There is no position that fixes it, no destination the movement is heading towards, no relief waiting at the end of the pacing. It is a signal to act with no action attached, running continuously for about 36 hours. And of all the things that this particular symptom ruins, the one it ruins most thoroughly is the only thing you actually want. Segment 9. Hour 14. Sleep stops answering the door. You're more tired than you have been in years, and you will not be sleeping. This is the cruel joke at the centre of the whole thing. Opioids suppress a great deal, including the systems that regulate arousal and wakefulness, and when they leave, those systems come roaring back online with the enthusiasm of an intern on their first day. Your heart rate is up, your brain is alert, your body is screaming for rest and simultaneously refusing to permit it. You will lie in the dark for hours with your eyes closed, doing an excellent impression of the person sleeping, fooling absolutely nobody, least of all yourself. The insomnia of opioid withdrawal is not ordinary insomnia, and it is worth being clear about the difference. Ordinary insomnia is a failure to fall asleep, usually because the mind will not stop working. This is a failure of the mechanism itself. Your sleep architecture, the ordered progression through light sleep, deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep that your brain has been running every night since before you were born, has been substantially rearranged by years of opioid use and is now being rearranged again in the opposite direction, at speed, without supervision. Opioids do something peculiar to sleep even when everything is going well. They suppress rapid eye movement sleep, the dreaming phase, and they suppress deep, slow-wave sleep, the genuinely restorative phase. What they leave you with is a great deal of light sleep that feels, from the inside, like being unconscious, and which does considerably less for you than it appears to, which means that most people arriving at hour 14 have not had a properly restorative night's sleep in a very long time, and are running a sleep debt that they were entirely unaware of. Now the suppression lifts, and everything that was held down tries to come back at once, in a body that is simultaneously flooded with noradrenaline. Your brain wants to sleep desperately. Your alarm system is convinced that something is actively hunting you. These two positions cannot be reconciled, and the result is a specific state that people describe with remarkable consistency, which is being unable to tell whether you slept or not. You lie there. Time passes strangely. You're not awake in any normal sense, but you're not asleep either, and you surface repeatedly from something that had the texture of a dream without any of the content. You check the time and discover that 11 minutes have gone by. You're certain it was an hour. Then you check again, and 2 hours have passed and you have no account of them whatsoever, the night becomes unreliable as a measurement, which is disorienting in a way that compounds everything else. And the akathisia from the previous segment is right there with you the entire time, making stillness impossible, so that even the shallow half-sleep you might manage is broken every few minutes by the need to move. You turn over, you get up, you lie down again. Some people manage a form of rest by walking until they are physically incapable of continuing, dropping into unconsciousness for 20 minutes through sheer depletion, and then waking with the restlessness fully restored. The knock-on effects arrive faster than you would expect. Sleep deprivation on its own, in a healthy person, produces irritability, poor judgment, emotional volatility, and a marked drop in pain tolerance within about 24 hours. Stack that on top of a nervous system already in full revolt, and you have an explanation for a great deal of what happens on day 2. Some of what people attribute to withdrawal is simply what any human being becomes after 2 days without proper sleep, applied to somebody who was already in trouble. There is one thing worth saying plainly here because it matters. Nobody sleeps properly through this. Not through willpower, not through breathing exercises, not through lying very still and trying harder. The mechanism is broken, and it will stay broken for several days. Sleep is not a discipline problem at hour 14. It is a hardware fault. So you lie in the dark, not sleeping, and the next thing your body takes away is your ability to be a consistent temperature. Segment 10. Hour 16. The thermostat breaks. Your body has spent your whole life quietly maintaining a temperature within about 1 degree, a genuinely impressive feat of engineering that you've never once thanked it for. Tonight that system fails spectacularly. You are drenched in sweat, soaking through a shirt, and at the same time you are shivering hard enough that your teeth click. Both simultaneously. You throw the blanket off and are freezing within a minute. You pull it back on and are boiling within 2. You will change the sheets tonight, and then you will need to change them again, and there is a particular flavour of despair in stripping a bed at 4 in the morning while shaking. The system that has just failed is called thermoregulation, and it lives in a structure called the hypothalamus, a region roughly the size of an almond sitting near the base of your brain. Under normal circumstances, it operates like an extremely competent building manager, receiving temperature readings from your skin and your core and adjusting output accordingly, opening blood vessels near the surface to shed heat, triggering sweat when that is not enough, closing vessels and initiating shivering when you need to conserve. You have never had to think about any of it, which is precisely how good it normally is at the job. Opioids interfere with this, lowering the set point slightly and dampening the responses. Remove them abruptly and the hypothalamus does not simply return to normal. It loses its calibration entirely for a while and starts issuing contradictory instructions to systems that were never designed to receive them at the same time. Sweat and shiver, constrict and dilate, conserve and shed, which is how you end up in the genuinely bizarre position of being visibly soaked and audibly shivering in the same moment. Physiologically, this makes no sense at all, and your body does it anyway, repeatedly, for the better part of a day and a half. The sweat is profuse, and it is different from ordinary sweat, heavier and more sour-smelling, because it is being driven by adrenal output rather than heat. People who have been through this frequently mention the smell, and mention that it is the thing that finally forces them to admit to someone what is happening. The soaking is not trivial in volume either. Shirts wring out, bedding becomes genuinely wet, not damp, Pillowcases become unusable within a couple of hours. If you're somewhere without access to a washing machine or a change of clothes, and a great many people going through this are, you spend the whole night cycling through progressively worse options until you are lying on a bare mattress with a towel, which is not a low point so much as a practical adaptation. Then the swing comes back the other way and you are freezing, not chilly, deeply, teeth-clackingly cold, the kind that feels like it is coming from inside your bones, and you pull everything you own on top of you, and it makes no difference at all because your skin is not the problem. 15 minutes later you are sweating through the lot. There is a specific exhaustion that comes from this cycle, and it is separate from all the other exhaustions currently in play. Every swing requires action. Blanket on, blanket off, shirt off, towel, sheet, up, down. You're performing continuous manual labour in service of a control system that has stopped working, doing by hand what your hypothalamus has done automatically and invisibly every second of your life until now. And you become aware, somewhere in the small hours, of how much silent competence you have been taking for granted. The thing that kept you at 37 degrees through every summer and every winter of your life, without ever once bothering you about it, has downed tools. It will come back. It comes back for essentially everybody within a few days. But at hour 16, soaked and shaking and hauling a wet sheet off a bed in the dark, it does not feel like a temporary administrative issue, and you have not yet met your legs. Segment 11. Hour 18. Your legs develop independent opinions, now the legs. English gave us cold turkey for the goosebumps, and it gave us kicking the habit for this. Deep in the muscles of your calves and thighs, an unbearable creeping restlessness sets in, an urge to move that builds until moving is not optional. So your legs kick, they jerk, they twitch, they thrash, sometimes hard enough to wake the person in the next room. You can suppress it for perhaps 20 seconds through pure force of will, and then the pressure builds until it feels like your bones are carbonated. It is restless leg syndrome turned up to a volume that has no business existing. The sensation itself is genuinely difficult to describe, which is why almost everybody who has had it resorts to the same handful of comparisons: fizzing, crawling, something wound too tight and being wound tighter. The best of them, and the one that comes up again and again independently, is the feeling of wanting to stretch a muscle that you cannot locate. You know exactly what would fix it. You simply cannot find where it is, and it is not in your skin. That distinction matters because it is coming later, and it feels completely different. This is deep, sitting in the meat of the calves and the long muscles of the thighs, and often in the upper arms as well, and no amount of rubbing or pressing or hot water reaches it. People take baths. People have somebody dig their thumbs into the muscle as hard as they can manage. It produces about 4 seconds of relief, which is enough to make you ask for it again, which is how you end up with somebody's exhausted brother massaging your calves at 3 a.m, to no lasting effect whatsoever. The mechanism appears to sit largely with dopamine, which is the same chemical implicated in ordinary restless leg syndrome, the condition that affects a substantial slice of the general population, and which is treated with dopamine-acting medication. Opioids, incidentally, are one of the most effective treatments for severe restless legs, which is a fact that sits rather uncomfortably in the middle of all this. Some people discover they have the condition for the first time in withdrawal, having spent years with it silently suppressed. Then there are the movements themselves, which are separate from the sensation and considerably stranger. These are not you deciding to shift position. These are involuntary, sudden, and often quite violent, a full jerk of the whole leg that happens without any warning or intention. Your foot flexes hard, your knee snaps up. If you are lying next to somebody, you will connect with them repeatedly, and they will not sleep either. If you're on a hospital trolley, you will kick the rail. If you're in the back of a van, and people do go through this in the back of vans, you will kick whatever is nearest. This is where kicking the habit comes from, and unlike some etymologies, it is not particularly disputed. It emerged from the same American slang world that gave us cold turkey, around the same period, and it is a straightforward description of what an observer sees, somebody lying on a bunk with their legs going. It is worth noticing that both of the phrases the wider culture uses for quitting drugs were coined by people watching withdrawal from the outside and describing the most visually obvious feature. Nobody named it after the vomiting or the dread. They named it after the poultry and the kicking. By hour 18, this has been running for a while, and the cumulative effect is a specific kind of muscular exhaustion. Your legs ache from the involuntary work they have been doing. Your hips are sore. You have the general soreness of somebody who did an unplanned workout, layered on top of everything else, and the workout is still going. The worst of it is that the legs make the pacing from segment 8 both necessary and useless. Walking helps the restlessness. Walking also exhausts legs that are already being wrung out by movements you did not order. So you walk until you cannot, then lie down, then get kicked awake by your own body inside 90 seconds, then get up and walk again. And at some point in this circuit, you pass a mirror and something about your face stops you. Segment 12. Hour 20. Your eyes give you away. Somewhere around now, you catch yourself in a mirror and notice that your pupils have gone enormous. Opioids constrict pupils down to pinpoints, and their absence swings the pendulum hard the other way, blowing them wide open so that your eyes look almost entirely black. Light becomes physically unpleasant. The overhead bulb feels like an interrogation. The phone screen is an insult. And there is a small specific humiliation in this one, because dilated pupils are a tell. Anybody who knows what they are looking at can read your last 20 hours off your face without you saying a single word. The two states have proper names, and both of them come up constantly in emergency medicine. Constricted pupils are miosis, and wide ones are mydriasis, and the reason they matter so much clinically is that they are among the fastest pieces of information available about somebody who cannot tell you what is going on. A person found unresponsive with pinpoint pupils and slow breathing is, until proven otherwise, an opioid overdose. And that single observation has started the treatment that saved a very large number of lives. Your eyes are a diagnostic instrument you carry around without consent. What is happening at hour 20 is that the muscle controlling your iris has lost its counterweight. There are two sets of muscle fibers in there, one circular that closes the pupil and one radial that opens it, and they work in opposition like a drawstring against a set of spokes. Opioids drive the circular set, which is why pupils go to pinpoints. Noradrenaline drives the radial set, and you currently have a great deal more noradrenaline in your system than any reasonable situation calls for. So the spokes pull and nothing pulls back, and your iris opens up to something close to its mechanical limit. The practical consequence is that a great deal more light is arriving on your retina than your brain is expecting, and the result is genuinely painful, not uncomfortable. Painful in the way that walking out of a matinee into bright afternoon sun is painful, except sustained for a day and a half. Ordinary domestic lighting becomes intolerable. Most people going through this end up in the dark by default, not for privacy but because the alternative hurts. which is why so many accounts of withdrawal take place in unlit rooms with the curtains shut in the middle of the day. Screens are their own particular problem, and they're worth mentioning because of what people actually do at hour 20. You cannot sleep. You cannot sit still. You have nothing to occupy you. So you reach for a phone, which is what everybody reaches for, and the phone is a small rectangle of hostile light being held about a foot from a pair of maximally dilated pupils. It lasts about 90 seconds before you put it face down again. Then there is the being seen part, which is not a physical symptom, but does a great deal of the emotional work of this stage. Dilated pupils and streaming eyes, and a fine tremor red, to anybody with relevant experience as exactly what they are. A nurse clocks it in about 2 seconds. A police officer clocks it. A parent who has been through this before with you clocks it instantly. And there is a particular look that arrives on their face which is worse than being asked about it directly. And you cannot conceal it. That is the thing. You can put on a jumper to hide the goosebumps. You can blame the nose on a cold. You can sit down to disguise the restlessness for a few minutes at a time. You cannot make your pupils smaller. There is no posture, no explanation, no force of will that closes them. The one part of your body that most reliably announces your situation to strangers is the one part you have no access to whatsoever. It is a strange sort of exposure, being betrayed by two muscles you have never once thought about. And the light is only the beginning of things that should not hurt and are about to. Segment 13, Hour 22. Everything hurts, including things that should not. People say bone pain, and it sounds like exaggeration until you feel it. It is a deep, grinding ache that sits inside the long bones of your legs and arms and lower back, in a place that no position relieves and no stretching reaches. And layered on top of it is something stranger. Your entire pain system has been recalibrated by years of chemical dampening, and now it is oversensitive. A bedsheet resting on your shin hurts. A gentle hand on your shoulder hurts. The clinical term is hyperalgesia, and what it means in practice is that your nerve endings have decided that everything, everywhere, all of it, is worth complaining about. Let us deal with the bone pain first, because it is the one that surprises people who assumed it was a figure of speech. It is not, strictly speaking, in the bone. Bone tissue itself has relatively few pain receptors in the interior. What is actually happening involves the periosteum, the sensitive membrane wrapped around each bone, along with the deep muscle and connective tissue surrounding it. All of it reporting distress at once with no way for your brain to localize the source. The result is a sensation your nervous system files under bone because it has nowhere better to put it. It concentrates in specific places with remarkable consistency across different people. The femurs, the shins, the lower back, right across the top of the pelvis, the upper arms. Ask a dozen people who have been through this to point to where it hurt, and you will get roughly the same map every time. It is a deep, dull, boring ache, using boring in the sense of a drill rather than a dull conversation, and it does not respond to paracetamol or ibuprofen in any meaningful way. Then hyperalgesia, which is the more scientifically interesting part and by some distance the more disorienting to live through. Over months and years of opioid exposure, your pain processing system compensates for constant suppression by turning up its own sensitivity in exactly the same way the locus coeruleus turned up its output. This process is well documented, and it explains something that surprises people. Long-term opioid users often become more sensitive to pain than they were before they started, even while medicated. Take the medication away and the compensation stands exposed with nothing damping it. So the volume knob on your entire sensory pain system is turned up somewhere it has never been. A bed sheet on your legs registers. This seam of a sock registers. Somebody putting a hand on your back to steady you produces a genuine flinch. When the sensitivity goes far enough that things which should not hurt at all begin to, it has its own name, allodynia, and it is one of the more distressing features of the whole affair, because it removes comfort as a category. There is nothing anyone can do for you physically. Being touched kindly hurts, and this is where the flu comparison from segment 6 finally breaks down. Flu aches. This is a different order of thing, and people who have had both are emphatic about it. The nearest common comparison is probably severe dengue, which earned the nickname breakbone fever for exactly the same reason, or the deep skeletal ache some people report during a serious bout of influenza multiplied several times and sustained for a day. There is one practical note worth including. Ordinary painkillers do very little here, and there is a real temptation to take a great deal more of them than the packet suggests on the grounds that the normal dose is achieving nothing. This is a genuinely dangerous instinct. Paracetamol in particular has a narrow margin and does serious liver damage in overdose, and it does it quietly over days in somebody who is already dehydrated and already feels terrible and will not notice the difference. Stick to the label. It will not fix this. Nothing on a shelf will fix this. What it will do is pass, but not before your digestive system, which has been suspiciously quiet for about a day, decides to make its own contribution. Segment 14, Hour 24. The stomach turns traitor. You have made it a full day, and your digestive system would like a word. There are more opioid receptors in your gut than almost anywhere else outside your brain, which is why heroin constipates so reliably, and why its absence does precisely the opposite with such enthusiasm. The nausea arrives first, thick and constant, sitting at the back of your throat. Your stomach cramps in long, slow waves, and you become aware, with mounting dread, that this is only the opening statement, because the gut has been holding its position for a very long time and it is about to make up for lost hours. The system involved here deserves its reputation. Your digestive tract has its own nervous system, called the enteric nervous system, containing somewhere in the region of 500 million neurons. That is more than a cat's brain, wrapped around your intestines, running most of its operations independently. It is sometimes called the second brain, and while that phrase gets overused, the underlying point is accurate. Your gut is not a passive tube. It is a large, semi-autonomous organ with opinions. It's also absolutely saturated with opioid receptors, and this is not an accident of design. Your body uses its own opioids to regulate gut motility, the rhythmic squeezing that moves things along. Introduce heroin, and that regulation is applied with enormous force. The squeezing slows to a crawl. Fluid gets reabsorbed. Everything sits still. This is why constipation is not merely a side effect of opioid use, but the single most universal and persistent one, the symptom that does not fade with tolerance the way euphoria does. People who have used for years are still constipated. It never stops, which means that when the suppression lifts, you are dealing with an intestinal system that has been on the brakes for a very long time and is now being handed back full control while flooded with noradrenaline. It does not ease back into service, it floors it. The first hour or two is nausea, and it is a particular flavour of nausea that people describe as unproductive. It is not the nausea of food poisoning, which builds towards a purpose and then delivers. It is constant, flat, sitting high in the throat, and it does not resolve. You cannot eat. The thought of food is genuinely repellent, and the smell of it is worse, which is why anybody trying to help you at this stage should be told clearly not to cook anything. Then the cramping starts, and this is the point where the tone of the whole experience changes. Long, slow, gripping waves through the lower abdomen, building over perhaps 30 seconds and then releasing, then building again. Between the waves you have a minute or two of something like normality, which is almost worse because it gives you time to anticipate the next one. People describe curling into a ball. People describe pressing their stomach into the corner of a table for counter-pressure. Both are extremely common, and neither achieves much, and you know where this is going, because your body has started telling you in unmistakable terms. There is a specific dread that arrives at hour 24, a full clear awareness of what is about to happen, and roughly how long it is going to last, and no ability whatsoever to prevent or delay it. It is the feeling of standing at the top of a slide you have already committed to. There is one thing worth doing right now, in the window before it starts, and it is the single most useful practical action available in this entire episode. Get fluid within reach, not a glass, a large bottle or several, and if you can manage it something with salt and sugar in it, oral rehydration sachets from a chemist, or failing that a flat sugary drink with a pinch of salt stirred in. Put it beside you. You're about to lose the ability to get up and fetch things, and the thing you are about to lose in volume is water. Because in about 6 hours, everything you have experienced so far is going to look like a warm-up. Segment 15. Day 2 arrives, and it is the worst one. Here is a thing worth knowing before you go any further. Day 2 is the peak, not day 1, which felt survivable in retrospect, and not day 3, which will eventually offer something resembling mercy. Hours 24 through 48 are where opioid withdrawal reaches its full and terrible expression. All systems misfiring at once, and this is the stretch that people describe years later, with a very particular look on their faces. If you're going to be talked out of continuing, statistically it happens here. Not because of weakness, because this is genuinely the hardest part, and it lasts about a day, and a day is an extremely long time. This is not a matter of opinion or emphasis. It is measurable, and it has been measured repeatedly. Remember that scoring system from segment 5, the clinical opiate withdrawal scale. Plot the scores of a group of people going through short-acting opioid withdrawal, and you get a curve, and the curve has a peak, and the peak sits at roughly 36 to 72 hours after the last dose for heroin, with the sharpest intensity clustering in the second day. Everything before was the climb. Everything after is descent. You are now at the top of the mountain, which is a nice way of putting something that has no nice way of being put. What makes day 2 categorically different from day 1 is not the arrival of new symptoms so much as the total simultaneity of the existing ones. Yesterday you had the yawning, then the nose, then the goosebumps, then the restlessness, arriving in a sequence you could at least track. Today you have all of them, at once, permanently, plus the gut, plus whatever your mind is about to do. There is no gap. There is no moment in the next 24 hours where you feel briefly all right, and then there is time, which stops behaving properly. This deserves more attention than it usually gets because it is one of the defining features of the experience, and it is not a metaphor. Time genuinely distorts under this kind of sustained physiological stress, combined with 2 days of no sleep. An hour becomes unrecognizable as a unit. People check the clock believing that a substantial portion of the night has passed and find that it is 11 minutes later. They do this again and again, sometimes for hours, and each time the gap between expectation and reality widens. This is arguably the cruelest thing about day 2, because the only genuine comfort available at this stage is the knowledge that it is temporary, and the distortion attacks precisely that. Being told this will be over in a day is meaningless when a day has become an unfathomable stretch of time. The knowledge is technically available and emotionally inaccessible. So let us be practical, because this is where practical matters. Stop thinking in days. The unit that works at this stage is much smaller. Get to the next hour. Get to the next glass of water. Get through the next wave of cramping, which will pass in under a minute because they all do. People who come through the worst of this often describe having shrunk their horizon deliberately to something they could actually manage, and it is a genuinely effective strategy rather than a motivational poster. And know the shape of the thing. You are at this moment at the highest point of the entire curve. Everything from here declines, not smoothly and not quickly, and there will be hours tomorrow that feel as bad as anything today, but the trajectory has already turned even if nothing in your body has yet received the memo. That is the honest map of day 2. It is the worst one. It is not the longest one, and you are already standing in it. Now let us talk about where you are going to spend most of it. Segment 16, Hour 30. The bathroom becomes your entire world. Let us not be delicate, because being delicate about this does a disservice to everyone who has lived it. Both ends, repeatedly, for hours. Your gut, freed from years of opioid suppression, empties itself with an urgency that leaves no room for dignity or planning, and it does not do this once. It does it again and again, until you are simply living on the bathroom floor with a towel folded under your head, because walking back to the bed and returning 4 minutes later has become logistically absurd. This is the part nobody puts in films, and it is the part that everybody who has been through it remembers most vividly. The vomiting is not the ordinary kind either. There is nothing in your stomach because you have not eaten in over a day, so what comes up is bile and water and whatever you last attempted to drink. Retching on an empty stomach is its own specific misery, all the muscular violence with nothing to show for it, and it goes on well past the point where there is any conceivable purpose to it. Your abdominal muscles will be genuinely sore tomorrow. Your throat will be raw. Small blood vessels around your eyes sometimes break from the pressure, leaving red spots across the whites and the skin beneath, which is harmless and looks alarming. The diarrhea runs in parallel rather than in turn, which is the detail that makes this stage so difficult to manage. Watery, urgent, and frequent enough that the intervals collapse into each other. This is that enteric nervous system from the previous segment finally cut loose, driving motility at maximum with no absorption time, and the fluid coming out of you is coming out of your circulation. That is the sentence that matters, and we will come back to it properly. What people actually remember, though, when they talk about this stage years afterwards, is not the physical process. It is the loss of dignity, and specifically how completely it goes. You will soil yourself, not through negligence and not because you did not make it in time due to some failure of effort, but because the interval between the first signal and the event is sometimes 0. This happens to grown adults. It happens in beds and on sofas and in the back seats of cars and on the floors of custody suites. And it happens to people who are fastidious and proud and have never in their lives been in a position like this. It is worth saying plainly that this is a medical event and not a moral one. Nor a virus does the same thing to people, and nobody attaches shame to it. Chemotherapy does something similar, and we regard it as an ordeal to be supported through. The mechanism here is identical, the loss of control is identical, and the only difference is what people believe about how you arrived. If you are the person helping somebody through this, the single most valuable thing you can do is treat it exactly as you would treat any other illness producing the same symptoms, which is to say practically and without comment. And then there is the floor. Almost everybody ends up on it. Tiles are cold, which helps with the sweating, and the bathroom is where the plumbing is, and the arithmetic of getting up and returning 4 minutes later stops working somewhere around the 6th or 7th trip. So you take a towel and a bottle of water and you set up camp, and you spend a substantial portion of day 2 lying on a hard floor a few feet from a toilet in the dark. There is a strange, small mercy hidden in this, which is that the bathroom floor is at least a destination. After a day and a half of pacing towards nothing, of chasing a comfortable position that does not exist, you have finally arrived somewhere that makes sense to be. But the fluid leaving you has to come from somewhere, and we need to talk about that before anything else happens. Segment 17, Hour 36. The skin wants off by now. Something has gone wrong with your sense of touch. Your skin feels too tight and too loose at once, and there is a crawling sensation across your back and arms, like something is moving just beneath the surface. You scratch, and it helps for about 4 seconds. Fabric is unbearable. Being naked is unbearable. Being touched is unbearable, and being alone is somehow worse. This is your peripheral nervous system firing off signals with nothing behind them. Phantom messages from nerve endings that have forgotten how to sit still, and knowing that it is not real does absolutely nothing to make it stop. The medical word for the crawling specifically is formication, from the Latin for ant, which is one of the more evocative pieces of naming in the whole of medicine. Somebody centuries ago listened to a patient describe this and reach for insects, and everybody since has agreed that insects are the right comparison. It appears in alcohol withdrawal, in stimulant use, in certain neurological conditions, and here, and in every one of those contexts, people independently arrive at the same description without having been prompted. It is distinct from the deep muscular restlessness of the legs, and the difference matters. That was inside, in the meat. This is at the surface, in the top layer, and it moves. It travels across your shoulder blades, up the back of your neck, along your forearms, in slow migrating patches. Because it moves, it is much harder to ignore than a static sensation would be. Your attention keeps getting dragged to whichever bit of you is currently reporting, and it is accompanied by a general failure of tactile calibration. Your skin cannot decide what it is. Too tight, as though shrunk slightly and stretched over a frame a size too large. Simultaneously loose and oversensitive. Combined with the hyperalgesia from segment 13, the result is that no arrangement of clothing or bedding is tolerable. A shirt is too much. No shirt leaves your skin exposed to air movement that registers as unpleasant. A sheet is intolerable. No sheet leaves you cold. There is no configuration that works, and you will try all of them. The scratching is the part that causes lasting damage, and it is worth flagging. Because scratching produces a few seconds of genuine relief, and because you have nothing else that produces any relief at all, people scratch a great deal. Long parallel marks down the forearms and across the upper back. Skin broken in places. In somebody who is dehydrated, malnourished, and possibly already carrying infections, broken skin is not a trivial matter. And open scratches in this population have a real habit of turning into abscesses and cellulitis. Short nails, something to hold. a cold flannel on the area, which does not fix it but occupies the same sensory channel and takes the edge off. Then there is the touch problem, which is where this becomes something more than a physical nuisance. You cannot bear to be touched, because everything hurts and everything crawls. And you very badly do not want to be alone, because it is the middle of the second night and you feel like you are dying. These two facts are both true at once, and they cannot be reconciled, and it puts anybody sitting with you in an impossible position. They reach for your hand and you flinch. They withdraw and you feel abandoned. If you are the one sitting with somebody, the answer is presence without contact. Stay in the room. Do not touch unless asked. Say very little, because sound is also a problem by now. The value you are providing is entirely in being there, and it is considerably larger than it feels from where you're sitting. Because the next thing that happens is that your heart starts behaving as though something is chasing you, and having another person in the room is the only evidence available that nothing is. Lie still, do nothing, and your heart is going at 120 beats a minute. Your blood pressure is up. Your breathing is shallow and quick. Your body is in a full sympathetic storm, the fight or flight system jammed wide open with no threat anywhere in the room to justify it. You feel like you have just sprinted up a flight of stairs, except you've been horizontal for 6 hours, and your body, having decided it is being chased, keeps producing adrenaline for a chase that is not going to happen, which is a remarkably efficient way to exhaust somebody who is already past exhaustion. This is the locus coeruleus at full output, the culmination of everything that started at hour 4. That grain of rice at the base of your brainstem has spent months pushing against a chemical hand, and it has now spent nearly 2 days pushing against nothing at all. The noradrenaline it produces is doing exactly what it evolved to do, which is prepare a mammal to fight or to run, heart rate up to deliver oxygen, blood pressure up to drive it, pupils wide to see, sweat to pre-cool, gut shut down or emptied, because digestion is not a priority when something has teeth. Look at that list again, and you will notice that it is almost the entire symptom picture of the last 40 hours. Nearly everything we have covered is a single system doing a single coherent job with total commitment in response to a threat that does not exist. The pulse is what you notice most at hour 40, because you can feel it. Lying in the dark, you become aware of your heartbeat in your chest, in your throat, in your ears against the pillow. It is fast and it is forceful, and there is a particular quality to it that people describe as pounding rather than racing, each beat landing harder than it should. Your hands shake. There's a fine tremor through the whole body that you can see if you hold a hand out flat, and it does not stop. Blood pressure rises too, sometimes substantially, and this is the point where the general reassurance that opioid withdrawal will not kill you needs a footnote. In a young, physically healthy person, it will not. The cardiovascular strain is unpleasant and it is survivable, but it is genuine strain, and in somebody with existing heart disease, in somebody much older, in somebody with a damaged heart from years of injecting or from an endocarditis infection, the numbers matter more. This is one of several reasons why medically supervised withdrawal is not a luxury service but simply a better way of doing it. And then there is the panic, which is not quite the same as the mental dread coming in the next segment and is worth separating out. What happens at hour 40 is that your body produces the complete physical signature of terror, and your brain reads that signature and draws the obvious conclusion: racing heart, tight chest, shallow breathing, tremor, sweating, sense of impending doom. Every one of those is on the diagnostic criteria for a panic attack, and you have all of them, continuously, for hours. People genuinely believe they're having a heart attack, People call ambulances, and this is not stupidity. It is a completely reasonable interpretation of the available evidence, which is why nobody should ever feel foolish for having made that call. If you are unsure, get it checked. That is what the service is for. What helps a little, and it is only a little, is knowing the mechanism. Your heart is not failing. It is being ordered to run by a brainstem structure that has lost its sense of proportion, and it is doing so competently. Slow breathing helps marginally, not because it fixes anything, but because it is the one input into this system you still have manual access to. The body has now given you everything it has, which means it is the mind's turn. Up to now, this has mostly been a physical event. That changes. Somewhere in the small hours of day 2, a specific and enormous dread settles over you, and it has no subject. You're not afraid of anything in particular. You're simply afraid, comprehensively, about everything and nothing, and the feeling has the texture of certainty rather than emotion. Your brain, deprived of the chemistry that has been managing your emotional weather for years, has lost the ability to distinguish between discomfort and catastrophe. Every worry you own arrives at once, dressed as an emergency, and stands at the end of the bed. The important thing to understand about this dread is that it does not feel like a mood. Moods can be identified and to some extent argued with. This presents as information. It arrives with the flat authority of a fact you have just remembered, and the fact is that something is terribly wrong and always has been. There is no proposition attached that you could examine and dismiss. It is simply a certainty sitting underneath everything else, and it is remarkably resistant to reasoning. Some of this is straightforwardly chemical. The same noradrenaline flood driving your heart rate is doing exactly what it does in any anxiety state. And if you produce the complete physical signature of fear for long enough, your brain will find a way to make sense of it. Some of it is the sleep deprivation, which by hour 42 is severe and which on its own is sufficient to produce emotional volatility and catastrophic thinking in perfectly healthy people. And some of it is the absence of the endorphin system we discussed in segment 2, which among its other jobs handles a great deal of routine emotional regulation. Then the content arrives, and this is where day 2 earns its reputation. In the middle of the night, with no sleep and no defences, your mind performs a comprehensive audit. Everything you have done, everyone you have let down, every bridge, every lie, every missed birthday and unanswered call and person who eventually stopped trying. It arrives all at once, and it arrives without any of the ordinary proportion that lets a person carry their history around during daylight. And here is the genuinely dangerous part, which needs saying directly. This combination, an unbearable physical state, total exhaustion, complete emotional dysregulation, and a mind conducting a merciless inventory at 4 a.m, is a serious risk period. Suicidal thoughts are common at this point in withdrawal. They are common enough that anybody supervising a detox is specifically watching for them. If that is where you are or where you have been, the thing to know is that this is a symptom presenting as a conclusion, and it is arriving at the exact hour when your capacity to evaluate anything is at its absolute lowest. Do not make decisions at hour 42, not about your life, not about your relationships, not about anything. Your judgment is not available right now. It comes back, and it comes back reasonably quickly, but tonight it is offline in the same way your thermostat is offline, and for the same reason. And tell someone, a friend, a helpline, an out-of-hours number, whoever is in the building. This is the point in the entire 72 hours where another human presence has the greatest measurable value, and the isolation that this stage produces is precisely what makes it dangerous. The dread tells you that reaching out is pointless and humiliating. The dread is a symptom. It is not a reliable source. What is true, and what is very hard to hold on to at hour 42, is that the emotional state you're in right now is being generated by a nervous system in acute crisis, and it will not survive contact with a functioning one. People who felt exactly this at 4 in the morning felt substantially differently by the weekend. The dread lifts. What it leaves behind is stranger and quieter, and it stays for a good deal longer. And then, underneath the dread, something flatter, and in some ways worse. Nothing is pleasant. Not warmth, not music, not the voice of somebody you love. The parts of your brain that register reward have been running on borrowed chemistry for so long that, without it, they produce essentially nothing. This is anhedonia, and it is the symptom that outlasts all the others by a considerable margin. The vomiting stops in days. This can hang around for weeks. Sitting in a warm room with your favourite song playing and feeling precisely as much about it as you would about a parked car is its own quiet kind of horror. The word comes from the Greek, meaning without pleasure, and it is used across psychiatry, most often in depression. What it describes is not sadness. That is the distinction everybody struggles with, and it is worth being careful about. Sadness is a feeling. It has a texture. It can be moving. People write songs about it and listen to them on purpose. Anhedonia is the absence of feeling, the removal of the response rather than the arrival of a bad one. And it is far harder to describe because there is nothing there to describe. The mechanism sits mainly with dopamine, in a circuit running between a structure called the ventral tegmental area and another called the nucleus accumbens. This is the reward pathway, and it is the system that assigns significance to things. Under normal conditions, opioids released in your brain trigger dopamine release in this circuit, which is how a warm bath or a good meal or somebody's company registers as worth having. Years of external opioids drive that circuit far beyond anything it evolved to handle, and it responds by scaling itself down, becoming less responsive, requiring more input to produce any output at all. Which means that at hour 44, ordinary pleasant things are landing on a system that has raised its threshold so high that almost nothing clears it. The practical experience of this is genuinely disorienting because the mechanics of your life still function. You can still hear music and identify it as music you have always liked and follow the melody. There is simply no accompanying response. You can be in a room with somebody who loves you and understand, intellectually, that this ought to be a comfort and feel nothing at all about it. Food is fuel. A hot bath is warm water. Everything is exactly what it is and nothing is more than that. People report this as feeling grey or muffled, or as though there is glass between them and the world. A common way of putting it is that colour has drained out of things, which is not a visual claim but the nearest available metaphor for what has been removed. And here is why this matters more than almost anything else we've discussed tonight. Anhedonia is the single biggest driver of return to use, and not for the reason people assume. It is not craving. Craving is loud and identifiable and can be resisted. This is quiet and it is patient, and it makes an extremely reasonable case, which is that life without the drug is not merely difficult but flat and pointless, and permanently so. Somebody, 4 weeks into recovery, physically fine, sleeping, eating, and feeling absolutely nothing about any of it, is at far greater risk than they were on day 2. So the fact worth carrying forward is this: it is temporary. Not 3 days temporary, which is the honest and unwelcome part, but temporary. The reward circuit does recover. Receptor density comes back up. It takes weeks, and in some cases several months, and it comes back gradually enough that most people do not notice it happening, only that at some point they laughed at something and meant it. But that is a long way from R44, and something considerably more immediate is waiting at the 2-day mark. 2 full days, and here is where your own mind turns lawyer. The cravings peak now, and they do not arrive as a shout. They arrive as reasonable suggestions, delivered in your own voice, with excellent supporting arguments. Just a little, to take the edge off, and then continue tomorrow when you have slept. You are clearly not doing this properly. You should stop and restart under better conditions. Nobody would blame you. The negotiation is sophisticated, patient, and relentless, and it knows every single thing you care about, because it is you. This is the hour where 3 days of suffering can be undone by 20 seconds of extremely persuasive reasoning. The mistake almost everybody makes about craving is picturing it as desire. That is what the word suggests, and it is not what this is. Desire is something you experience as coming from you, a preference you hold and could in principle set aside. What arrives at hour 48 presents itself as analysis. It does not say you want this. It says, with considerable evidence, that this is the sensible course of action available to a rational person in your circumstances, and the arguments are good. That is the part nobody warns you about. Your mind does not offer you something stupid that you can dismiss. It offers you the strongest available case, assembled by something that has full access to your history, your values, your specific vulnerabilities, and every counter-argument you have ever used against it. It will point out, accurately, that you did not choose this and were not prepared for it, which is true, and that you should stop and restart properly with medication and support, which is genuinely better advice than what you are currently doing. It will point out that you're in no state to make major life changes, which is also true. It will suggest a smaller amount, purely to reduce the symptoms to a manageable level, which sounds like harm reduction rather than surrender. It will remind you of somebody who needs you functional tomorrow. It will observe that you have already proved you can endure 2 days, so nothing has been wasted. Every one of these contains a real truth. That is why the negotiation works. It is not lying to you. It is selecting from true statements with a single objective in mind. There is also a specific feature of this hour that makes it more dangerous than day 1 was, which is that you are close enough to the end to make the ending feel meaningless. On day 1, using would clearly have been giving up. At hour 48, you have already absorbed the worst of it. The peak is passing, and there is a very seductive line of thinking that says the hard part is done, and the remaining discomfort therefore does not count for much. This is precisely backwards, and it is the reasoning that ends more attempts than exhaustion ever does. What actually helps here is narrow and unglamorous, delay rather than refuse, because the craving operates in waves, and a wave has a duration. Set a small number of minutes and get to the end of them, and then set another small number. This works better than resolve, because resolve is a finite resource and you have spent most of yours. Get the decision out of your own head and into somebody else's by saying it out loud to a person on a phone, because the arguments are enormously less convincing when spoken to another human being than when circulating internally at 4 in the morning. And know the shape of what you are hearing. This is not a considered judgment about your life that you have arrived at through reflection. It is a symptom, generated by the same nervous system that has spent 2 days convincing you that you are cold in a warm room and being hunted in an empty one. It has been wrong about everything else tonight. It is wrong about this too. But there is one thing your body is doing at hour 48 that is not a symptom, not a negotiation, and not something you can afford to ignore. There is a line people repeat, often reassuringly, that opioid withdrawal will not kill you. It is broadly true, and it is also missing something important. What kills people in withdrawal is dehydration. Hours of vomiting and diarrhea, combined with drenching sweat and an inability to keep water down, can strip out fluid and electrolytes fast enough to cause dangerous heart rhythms, especially in somebody already malnourished. People have died in police cells and locked rooms from exactly this, while everybody involved assumed they were simply having a bad few days, small sips, constantly, and something with salt and sugar in it. This is the one part of tonight that is not optional. The mechanism is worth understanding properly, because the danger is not really about water. You could lose a substantial volume of plain water and feel dreadful and survive it comfortably. What you're losing along with the water are electrolytes, principally sodium and potassium is the one that matters most here. Potassium is what your heart muscle uses to reset itself between beats. The electrical rhythm that keeps a heart contracting in an orderly sequence depends on potassium moving across cell membranes in precise quantities, and the range your body tolerates is narrow. Push it too low, a condition called hyperkalemia, and the rhythm becomes unstable. In the worst case, the heart stops coordinating altogether and simply quivers, which is fatal within minutes without intervention. Now consider what the last 48 hours have done. Vomiting removes potassium. Diarrhea removes a great deal of potassium. Heavy sweating removes sodium and potassium. You've been doing all three simultaneously for most of a day and a half, while unable to keep down anything that would replace them in a body that was very likely poorly nourished before any of this began. That is the entire recipe. This is why deaths in custody are the recurring story here, and there have been enough of them to have prompted formal inquiries in several countries. Somebody is arrested, goes into withdrawal in a cell, is observed to be vomiting and sweating and distressed, and is assessed by people who've been told, correctly in a narrow sense, that opioid withdrawal is not life-threatening. They are checked periodically. They deteriorate quietly. The same thing happens in bedrooms with well-meaning families keeping an eye out, and the pattern is identical, because nobody was watching for the right thing. So here is what to actually do, and it is genuinely simple. Sip constantly. Not glasses, which will come straight back up, but small mouthfuls every few minutes continuously. A stomach that rejects 200 milliliters will often hold 20. Over an hour, 20 milliliters at a time adds up to more than you think. Use oral rehydration salts if you can get them from any chemist, because they are formulated in precisely the right proportions and they are extremely cheap. If you cannot, a flat sugary drink with a pinch of salt stirred in does a reasonable job, because the sugar is not a treat. It is what allows your gut to absorb the sodium at all. Plain water alone, in large quantities, can actually make the electrolyte picture worse. And know the signs that this has gone beyond managing at home. Not passing urine for 8 hours or more, or passing very little and very dark. Standing up and going grey or nearly fainting. A heart rate that stays high even at rest. Confusion, slurred speech, or difficulty staying awake in a way that is different from exhaustion. Muscle weakness, particularly a heaviness in the legs. Any of those means an ambulance, and it means one without a debate about whether it is worth bothering anybody. Nobody should die of this. It is a solved problem, treatable in any hospital in the world with a bag of fluid and a blood test. And once you have that bottle beside you, you can turn your attention back to the fact that the fridge sounds like a lorry. The tap dripping in the next room is intolerable. The fridge cycling on sounds like a lorry starting. Someone closing a door 2 floors down goes through you like a slap. Your entire sensory system has had its gain turned up. The filters that normally screen out irrelevant noise stripped away along with everything else. And the result is a world that has become abrasive at every point of contact. Light is too bright, sound is too loud, smells are overwhelming, and the sensation of your own clothing is a running commentary you cannot mute. It is not that the world got louder, it is that you lost the volume knob. The filtering system that has failed is called sensory gating, and it is one of the more underrated pieces of equipment you own. Your brain receives an enormous volume of sensory information every second and consciously registers almost none of it. The pressure of the chair, the hum of the building, traffic outside, your own breathing. All of it is arriving and all of it is being discarded before it reaches you by a process running continuously in the background that you have never once had to think about. Under the conditions of our 50, that process degrades badly. Partly it is the noradrenaline again, since a system convinced it is under threat has excellent reasons to stop discarding information and start flagging everything. Partly it is straightforward sleep deprivation, which impairs gating in anybody, which is why an ordinary person on their second sleepless night finds themselves unreasonably irritated by the sound of somebody eating. The effect is that everything gets through. Not amplified exactly, although it feels amplified, but simply unfiltered, arriving at full strength with no triage. And because your brain is trying to process all of it consciously, it produces a specific kind of mental exhaustion on top of every other exhaustion currently in play. Certain sounds become genuinely unbearable, and they are rarely the loud ones. The dripping tap is the classic, and its intolerability is out of all proportion to its volume, because it is intermittent and irregular, and your brain cannot habituate to it. The fridge compressor kicking in, a clock, somebody breathing. A television 2 rooms away where you can hear the rhythm of the speech but not the words, which is arguably the worst sound available to a human being in this condition. Smell joins in as well, and this one has consequences. Your sense of smell becomes sharp and deeply unreliable in what it finds offensive, and cooking smells in particular are catastrophic when you are already nauseated. This smell of frying, of coffee, of anything with fat in it travelling under a door is enough to send somebody back to the bathroom. If you are looking after a person in this state, the single kindest thing you can do is not cook in the building. And then there is speech, which is the difficult one, because the people around you will want to help, and helping usually involves talking. At our 50, being spoken to is genuinely hard work. Words arrive at full volume and require processing you do not have available, and even gentle conversation is tiring in a way that is very hard to explain without sounding ungrateful. So the environment matters more than almost anything anybody can do actively. Dark, or as close to it as possible. Quiet with a consistent low sound rather than silence, because a fan or a hum gives your gating system something steady to settle against and masks the irregular noises that cause the trouble. No cooking, minimal conversation, nobody hovering. This is one of the few things in the entire 72 hours that responds well to intervention. You cannot fix the aching or the restlessness or the dread. You can absolutely turn a light off, and in a dark, quiet room, somewhere around hour 54, something happens that has not happened for 2.5 days. Then, without warning, you go under. Not properly, not for long, but you drop into something like sleep for 20 or 30 minutes, and it is the first you've had in 2.5 days. And it is not restful, because the dreams arrive immediately and they are extraordinarily vivid. Rapid eye movement sleep has been suppressed for years, and it comes back with interest, flooding in all at once, producing dreams so intense and so detailed that you wake unsure of where you are. Very often you dream about using, you wake convinced you have. The relief and the disappointment arrive at exactly the same moment. What is happening here has a name, and it is one of the more elegant pieces of terminology in sleep medicine. It is called rapid eye movement rebound. Your brain keeps an account of the dreaming sleep it is owed, and when that sleep has been suppressed for a long period, it does not simply write off the debt. It collects, aggressively, at the first opportunity. So instead of easing into the ordinary architecture of a night, cycling gradually down through light sleep into deep sleep and only reaching the dreaming phase after an hour or so, you drop directly into it within minutes of losing consciousness. The result is dreaming of a quality most people never experience. Not the vague, dissolving material of an ordinary night that evaporates on waking, but dense, coherent, saturated dreams with the full texture of real experience. People report smell in them, and physical sensation, and complete emotional weight. They are exhausting rather than restorative, which is why 20 minutes of this leaves you feeling worse than the 2 hours of lying awake that preceded it. And they very frequently concern using. This is close to universal, reported so consistently that it is regarded as an expected feature rather than a curiosity, and it continues intermittently for months into recovery. The dreams are detailed and complete, the entire sequence, and they carry the full relief of the real thing. Then you wake up and there is a specific moment, usually 2 or 3 seconds long, in which you do not yet know which world you are in. In that gap you believe it happened, and what arrives in those seconds is genuinely complicated, because part of it is relief, an enormous involuntary flood of it, and part of it is despair at having thrown away 2 days, and part of it is the slow realization that neither of those things is true. The order in which those feelings arrive tells people something about themselves that they often did not want to know at hour 54 in the dark. There is no clean way to interpret these dreams, and it is worth saying so, because people find them disturbing and read them as a verdict on their commitment. They are not. They are a mechanical consequence of a suppressed sleep phase, returning at speed in a brain whose reward circuitry is currently the loudest thing in the building. A dream about using means your rapid eye movement sleep has come back online. That is all it means. What matters more is what this fragment of sleep represents, and it is the first genuinely good news in this entire script. Sleep returning, even briefly, even badly, is your brain beginning to reassemble something. It is the first system to show any sign of recovering function, and it does so several hours before you feel any better in any other respect. You will not recognize it as progress at the time. You will wake disoriented, drenched, unsure how long you were out, with the fading impression of a dream you would rather not have had. The night will feel like a failure. It was not. That was the turn. Because within a few hours something in your stomach is going to loosen its grip for the first time since yesterday morning. Something shifts. It is small and you might miss it. You realize you've gone perhaps 40 minutes without thinking about the bathroom. You keep a mouthful of water down, and then another, and it stays. The cramping is still there, but it has changed character, less like a fist and more like a bruise. Your body has moved past the peak of the storm, and although you feel wrecked in every possible dimension, the trajectory has finally turned. Nobody announces this. There is no moment of triumph. You simply notice sometime later that the last hour was slightly less unbearable than the one before it. The mechanism behind this is unglamorous and worth knowing, because it explains why the improvement comes in this particular order. Your gut was the most heavily suppressed system you had, carrying by far the greatest weight of receptors outside your brain, and it was therefore the most violent in its rebound. But rebound is a finite process. There is only so much accumulated motility to work through, and by hour 60, your intestines have been running at maximum for the better part of 30 hours and have largely finished making their point. The improvement is not linear, and you should not expect it to be. There will be another bad hour tonight. There will very likely be another wave tomorrow morning, because the recovery curve has bumps in it, and the bumps are dispiriting precisely because you had begun to hope. What has changed is not that the symptoms have stopped, but that the baseline has dropped, so that even the bad hours from here are measured against a lower floor. What you should do with this window is entirely practical, and it is the same thing we discussed at hour 24, now finally possible. Drink. Properly, steadily, and with electrolytes in it. You have spent a day and a half unable to replace anything you are losing, and you are meaningfully depleted, and this is the first opportunity your body has given you to correct that. Small amounts frequently is still the rule, because a stomach that has just stopped rejecting things can be talked back into rejecting them by ambition. Do not eat yet, or not much. The temptation exists in some people, and it is a mistake at hour 60. Your gut has been through something, and the lining is inflamed, and the motility is still erratic, and a proper meal will set you back several hours. If you want something, dry toast or a plain biscuit, in small quantities, and stop before you want to. The other thing worth naming here is a specific psychological trap that catches an enormous number of people at this exact point. You have improved. You're still profoundly unwell, but you can tell the difference, and the difference feels significant because it is the first change in a positive direction in 60 hours. And a very reasonable sounding thought arrives, which is that you have now proved you can do this, so the remaining discomfort is optional, and you could resolve it in about 4 minutes. This is the bargaining from segment 21, returning in a much more dangerous form because now it is dressed as success rather than surrender. It is worth being explicitly on guard for it. The improvement is real, it is not a license. What you're actually experiencing at hour 60 is the beginning of the descent, and it is genuinely worth marking quietly in whatever way you can manage. 2.5 days ago, your nervous system began an enormous and violent recalibration, and it is now most of the way through it, and it did that with almost no help from you beyond your continued presence. And a few hours from now, it is going to ask you for something it has not asked for in a very long time. Now something genuinely strange happens. You want food, actual food, not the theoretical concept of it. Appetite is one of the many things opioids quietly switch off, and its return is one of the first real signs that the machinery is coming back online. It arrives with almost comic force, a ravenous specific hunger, and people in this exact position have been known to eat entire loaves of bread at 3 a.m, with tears in their eyes for reasons they cannot fully explain. Go gently, because your gut is still recovering, but do not underestimate what this moment means. Your body is placing an order for the future. The suppression that has just lifted was substantial and long-running. Opioids reduce appetite through several routes at once, slowing the stomach so that you feel full on very little, damping the hormonal signaling that drives hunger, and blunting the reward response that makes food appealing in the first place. The result is that most people who use heavily for any length of time eat very badly. Not through choice, but because the signal that tells you to eat has been turned down for years. So when it comes back, it does not come back politely. It arrives as a genuine, physical, urgent hunger of a kind you may not have felt since childhood, and it is frequently very specific. People want one particular thing with an intensity that seems disproportionate. Sugar features heavily, and so does bread, and so does anything with salt in it, which makes reasonable physiological sense given what your electrolytes have been through. It is also, for a great many people, the first thing in months or years that has felt actively good, not merely tolerable, good. Which is worth pausing on because in segment 20 we established that your reward circuitry is currently producing almost nothing, and yet here is a slice of toast at 3 a.m. delivering something. Hunger and eating run on machinery old enough and fundamental enough that it is among the earliest to come back, and its return is the first real evidence that the rest of it will follow. That is why people cry over the toast, not because of the toast. The practical advice, though, is to be sensible, and it is the least welcome advice in this segment. Your digestive system has spent 30-odd hours doing something extremely violent and is not ready for a large meal. Eating too much too fast at hour 66 is one of the more common ways to produce a miserable setback, and the resulting cramping and nausea will feel like a relapse of the whole thing. So start small and bland. Toast, plain crackers, a banana, which is also usefully full of the potassium you have been losing. Soup, particularly anything with salt in it. Small portions with gaps between them. Keep drinking alongside since rehydration is still the priority and food does not replace it. Add richer things gradually over the following day rather than immediately. And expect your appetite to be erratic for a while rather than simply restored. It comes back in surges, disappearing again for stretches, and it takes a week or two to settle into anything reliable. Wait for people who have lost a lot of it, comes back slowly and later. There is one more thing to say about R66, and it is the reason this segment exists at all. Every other milestone in this script has been a symptom arriving. This is the first one that is a function returning. Everything up to now has been your body dismantling an adaptation. This is your body beginning to build something, which means you're nearly at the mark, and the mark is going to be a considerable disappointment. Here it is, 3 days, 72 hours. And here is the thing nobody prepares you for. You do not feel triumphant. You feel like something that has been dragged behind a vehicle. You are weak, hollow, aching, sleepless, and profoundly flat. The acute phase is largely behind you. The vomiting has stopped. The goosebumps have gone. The legs have finally shut up. And you have arrived at the finish line to find that it is not a finish line at all. It is a landing. And this gap between what you were told to expect and what you actually feel is precisely where a great many people get into trouble. Take stock of what has actually happened to your body over 3 days, because it explains a great deal about why R72 feels the way it does. You have not slept properly. You have been sweating continuously for 2 days. You have lost a significant volume of fluid at both ends. You have eaten almost nothing. You've been in an adrenaline state for the better part of 48 hours, which burns through reserves at a rate that nothing about lying in a dark room would suggest. Your muscles have done involuntary work for a day and a half. Somebody who had done nothing but that, with no drugs involved at all, would be wrecked. That is where you're starting from. What has genuinely improved is the acute autonomic storm. Your pulse has come down, your temperature is roughly behaving, the gut has finished, the goosebumps and the sneezing and the streaming have largely stopped. If somebody scored you on that clinical scale right now, you would come in dramatically lower than yesterday, and by the standards of the measurement you are much better. What has not improved is everything else, and the list is long. You cannot sleep properly and will not for a while. The anhedonia is entirely intact and in fact more noticeable now that the physical noise has quietened down enough for you to hear it. You are weak in a way that makes stairs a genuine consideration. Your concentration is poor, your mood is unreliable and will swing without warning for weeks. Which brings us to the expectation problem, and it is not a minor one. Everybody knows the figure, 3 days. It is in the films, it is in the folk wisdom, it is what people tell each other. 3 days, and you are through the worst of it. And that statement is technically accurate about the acute phase and enormously misleading about the experience, and the gap between the two does real damage. Because somebody who's been holding on for 3 days on the understanding that 3 days is the price, and who arrives at hour 72 feeling hollow, exhausted, unable to sleep, and unable to feel anything, reasonably concludes that something has gone wrong, that they have failed at it somehow, that this is simply what life is going to be now. And that conclusion, arriving in somebody with no reserves left, is considerably more dangerous than any of the physical symptoms we have spent the last 2 days discussing. So let us correct the number properly. 3 days gets you through the acute phase. The full return of sleep, appetite, energy, mood, and the capacity to enjoy things takes weeks, and in some cases a few months. That is not a failure, and it is not unusual. It is the ordinary, well-documented, entirely expected course of the thing, and the only reason it comes as a shock is that nobody says it out loud. You have done the hard part. You have not done all of it, and being told otherwise has set up more people for a fall than almost anything else in this whole business. And there is one more thing, and if you take nothing else from tonight, take this, because it is the part that actually kills people. So there it is. 72 hours, 3 days that from the outside looked like a person lying in a dark room doing nothing at all. No cameras, no audience, no dramatic music swelling at the difficult bits. Just somebody in a quiet flat with the curtains shut, going through one of the most demanding physiological events a human being can experience, and doing it so invisibly that a neighbour passing the door would have assumed they had a bad case of flu and left it at that. And when you lay the whole thing out end to end, there is something almost absurd about the sequence of it. Your body, faced with a genuine crisis, opened proceedings with a yawn. It followed that up with sneezing, which is not a sentence anybody expects to read about serious medical suffering. It made your arms look so much like supermarket poultry that an entire phrase entered the English language on the strength of the resemblance. It made your legs kick, which gave us the other phrase. Somewhere in the design process, decisions were made that will never be adequately explained. But underneath the absurdity, something remarkable was happening, and it deserves saying plainly before you go to sleep. Nobody performed that recovery. There was no surgeon, no machine, no intervention. A nervous system that had spent months or years quietly rebuilding itself around a set of conditions simply began, without being asked, to rebuild itself back. The bakery reopened, the receptors came out of hiding, the thermostat found its calibration, the gut remembered its rhythm, Every one of those repairs happened without supervision, without instruction, and without any conscious contribution from the person it was happening to, who spent most of it lying on a bathroom floor with a towel under their head, entirely convinced that nothing good was occurring anywhere. That is the thing worth sitting with tonight. Your body does not need you to believe in it. It just needs the hours, and it is worth remembering who else is in these stories because they almost never get mentioned. The brother massaging somebody's calves at 3 a.m. to no effect whatsoever, and doing it again 20 minutes later anyway. The friend who stopped cooking in their own kitchen for 2 days because the smell was unbearable to somebody on their sofa. The mother who stripped a soaked bed at 4 a.m. without saying anything about it, and then did it again at 6. The nurse who has seen this 100 times and still fetches the water without making a face. None of them fixed anything. That was never available to them. They simply stayed, and staying turned out to be the entire job. If you have ever been one of those people, you may not have realized at the time how much you were doing. You were doing nearly all of it. There is a version of tonight's episode that would end by telling you to be grateful for the modern world, and normally that is exactly where we land. Clean water, indoor plumbing, the fact that your teeth are not currently being removed by a barber. Tonight the gratitude is a slightly different shape, because this is not a story about a distant century. It is happening tonight, in your city, probably within a few streets of wherever you're lying. So instead, be quietly grateful that this is a solved problem, that there are medications which cut the death rate in half, and that they exist, and that they are prescribed every day by people whose entire working life is spent on this. Be grateful that a small plastic device exists which reverses an overdose in minutes, requires no training, and is handed out free in a great many places. Be grateful that a paper sachet costing almost nothing, dissolved in water, prevents the thing that actually kills people in a locked room. Every one of those is recent. Every one of those was invented by somebody. And every one of them is the reason that a set of 3 days, which used to be a coin toss, is now overwhelmingly survivable. That is not a small thing to have. It took a very long time to get. And if you happen to be listening to this from inside it, if you are lying somewhere right now with the lights off because they hurt, waiting for an hour to pass that does not seem to want to, then there are only 2 things worth carrying out of tonight, and neither of them is complicated. The first is water, small mouthfuls often. Not because it will make you feel better, because it will not, but because it is the one thing standing between a very bad few days and a genuinely dangerous one. The second is that somebody should know where you are, not to rescue you. There is no rescue available, and nobody can take a single hour of this off your hands, just so that a person exists who would notice. That is the whole requirement, and it turns out to be the difference in almost every story that ends badly. Everything else is time, and time passes whether or not you are impressed by it. And here is the last thing, the one to fall asleep on. Every symptom in tonight's episode, all 30 segments of it, every ache and shiver and impossible position and hour that refused to pass, was your body doing exactly what it was built to do. Not malfunctioning, adapting at speed, under difficult conditions with total commitment and no complaints, in the same way it has been doing quietly since before you were born. It kept your temperature within a degree for decades without ever mentioning it. It has been reopening and rebuilding and recalibrating in the background of your entire life, and it will keep doing that tonight while you sleep, without needing your permission or your attention or your gratitude. That is worth a moment before you drift off. Somewhere under the blanket in the dark, an enormous amount of quiet, competent work is going on, and none of it requires anything from you at all. So let it get on with it. Settle in. Let your shoulders drop. The room is dark. The fan is humming. And the water is within reach if you want it. Nothing needs solving tonight. Nothing needs deciding tonight. And if something is arguing otherwise in the back of your mind at this hour, it has been wrong about everything else today, and it is wrong about that too. You're warm. You're still. Nothing is chasing you. The hours will pass on their own. They always do. Good night.